Hello and welcome to Bow Beats and this tutorial on my Ultimate Circuit setup. So this is the third video I've made on the Ultimate Circuit setup, and in the previous videos a lot of you guys were asking how have you set it up? How's the audio routing? How's the MIDI routing? And what goes into what? So in this video I will go over all those things. But first let's just have a little listen on something I've been working on using the Ultimate Circuit setup. Let's start off by talking about the MIDI routing. This is Paul, this is my old circuit, and this is Barry, my slightly newer circuit. Paul here is sort of the master. He sends the clock values, basically the BPM. So I've taken MIDI out from Paul into MIDI in of Barry. But of course I don't want Paul here to send MIDI notes on the different channels here, because then he would trigger Barry's synth number 1 and synth number 2 and so on, and I don't want that. I only want them to sync to BPM. So what I've done is I've gone into the MIDI settings on the circuit here, and I've turned off so that it doesn't transmit the MIDI notes, the MIDI values. It only transmits the clock. So basically it just sends the BPM. And then here over on Barry, I have set it up so that the MIDI output from Barry goes into the base station. And it's set up so that I use synth number 1, sending me on MIDI channel number 1 into the base station that receives on MIDI channel 1 as well. And what I usually do as well is that I turn down the volume here on synth number 1 all the way. So when I play it, you only hear the base station 2. Now I could of course turn up the volume, it'll sound like this. So you can do some interesting overdubbing as well. If I wanted to send on both synth channel 1 and 2 to an external, say a different external synthesizer, say a Mother 32 for example, I could use this little box here. This is a MIDI splitter. So basically it takes the MIDI input from the output of the circuit number 2 and it splits it into 5 different MIDI outputs. So you could very easily connect circuit number 2 here to 5 different sources. Now I'm not sure if that's something you want to do, but it's quite possible. So sending clock from circuit number 1 to circuit number 2, sending notes on channel 1 to the base station. And of course you can play the base station as well live in a performance. So what does the Launch Control XL do in this setup? Well, first and foremost, it's connected with USB to my MacBook Pro. It's a 2016 model, so I have to have a USB dongle in order to connect it, because it's standard, it's traditional USB, and the MacBook Pro only has USB-C. And I have it set up so that inside of Cubase, I have one channel that has the Launch Control here as the source. So all the MIDI that is transmitted via the little faders and knobs here is transmitted through this MIDI channel to the circuit number 1 here, Paul. But it's not over USB. Well, I could of course hook up this circuit into my computer with USB, but since I have limited USB ports and I don't want to buy another USB hub, I actually use physical MIDI. So this is a bit cumbersome, but it works. So basically I use the MIDI output from my Claret 8 Pre from Focusrite, my sound card. It's over here. So I use the physical MIDI out from the sound card into circuit number 1 here. So when I turn these faders here, I only impact the values of circuit number 1. So if I start circuit number 1 here and stop circuit number 2, So in the setup here, I use one of Lightfinger's templates, and basically it lets me control the volume here using 6 faders. And for every channel, I can control the delay and the reverb, as well as, at the moment, I think it's, I have a couple of different templates here, but at the moment I use these knobs here to control the macro parameters of Synth 2. I can also play Synth 2 using these buttons here. Having the extra keyboard is very handy. For example, when you only have one circuit and you want to play synth number 2 as well as synth number 1 at the same time. As you can see, I'm not the greatest at playing live, but it's actually quite, it's actually quite useful and quite fun. Then I also have these two faders here that affect pitch of the drum channels here on drum channel 3 and 4, as well as I can use these knobs here to change the drum sounds and so on the fly, something like this. And there are, of course, a lot of great templates for the launch control, and it's also very easy to set it up yourself to use it with, all the kinds of different hardware you might have, or use it together with a DAW. So I really like it. It's got a really nice build quality to it, and it was fairly easy to set up. The only downside being that it doesn't have physical MIDI I/O on it, so you need either a computer or a MIDI host. So what about the audio? Well, it's pretty straightforward. I have stereo out from the circuits going into channels 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 on my Claret 8 Pre over there. I chose the Claret because it's a big sound card with 8 physical inputs, and you can expand it later with more I/O. So overall, it's a really sweet sound card. It has amazing latency, and I could even set it up so that I use effects inside of Cubase in real time on my external synthesizers. Now, I usually don't do it, habits and whatnot, but it's definitely possible. And then, of course, I have mono out from the base station 2 here into channel number 1 here on the Claret. So the audio routing is pretty straightforward. And of course, if you don't have a multi-input audio interface, you can always use a little mixer in between. That'll work just fine. So there's not many downsides to this setup, just that the launch control here needs a computer or MIDI USB host in order to work with the setup. And if that's a problem for you, well, I guess it depends on your kind of budget, or if you already have a USB host and if you're okay with using a computer. I find it a little bit cumbersome, and I'm probably investing in a USB host later on. Something like an iConnect MIDI, perhaps I'm going for the one with the 10 ports just to have a lot of MIDI I/O. So if that's not something you want to invest in, maybe the launch control isn't the perfect companion for your DAW-less setup. But if you're okay with using a DAW, I thought the integration was really smooth. And I guess what really ties this setup together is the sound card with its 8 inputs and low latency, making it a lot easier to record everything as stems, and then you can add effects later on, or mix it down, or cut individual pieces out of the track and just use, if for example if you have like a great loop that you want to use but perhaps not the entire jam, you can just cut it out and use it. So that's something I really enjoy with this setup. And I really want to highlight that using a MIDI splitter like this can be really useful, because then you can add more than one external synthesizer. For example, I could add my Brother 32 to this setup, or the drum brute, and so on. And of course, if I connect the circuits via USB instead of using physical MIDI and using, say, my DAW as a master clock, sending BPM to them, I could add a lot of different synthesizers to this setup. But then of course you always have the argument, like, why would you use the sequencers on the circuit if you already have everything hooked up to a DAW? Then you could just use Cubase or Ableton or Machine or Logic or something in order to send MIDI data. So I think that's kind of a counter argument to having a setup like that. But using this as a sort of semi DAW-less setup is a lot of fun. So guys, I think that's about it. If you have any more questions about this setup, be sure to leave them down in the comments. If you want to support me, hit the like button. You can always head over to patreon.com/bowbeats. links in the description if you want to support me further. So I just want to say a big thank you that you're here watching me, and I hope to, you know, pick up the pace when it comes to my video production again. I've been sick for 3 weeks, but I'm on the mend. I'm on the mend, and it's getting better. So thank you so much for watching, and have a very pleasant day. Thank you.